Okay, Genesis 5:32, he says, and Noah was 500 years old when he begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Only one begetting and 3 children. In the Chronicles or in the genealogy lists, when there's another child, it'll say, and they begot, and they begot. Every begetting equals a child or a birth. So here there's one begetting and 3 children. You find the same thing with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel are twins. Now, it's interesting that Noah has triplets because Noah becomes a direct respondent to Adam and Eve because they're both told to replenish the earth. They both have all the same similarities because they're both getting keys to a new kingdom. So Noah has 3 children there. The other interesting thing is, let me find it. So, with this, once we collect all the details, all the fine details in this story add up to a bunch of information. But you have to collect all the fine details first. So that's one little detail. And that appears somewhere else in the story, but I didn't write it down, so I don't have it at hand. Look at chapter 6, verse 3. Chapter 6, verse 3. Chapter 6, 3 says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay, that's not talking about humans. He says, because he also is flesh. Well, that's all we are is flesh. We're not also flesh. We are flesh. So the 120 years is the limitation of the lifespan of the giants. So because of that verse right there, people try to say Noah preached for 120 years and then God sent the flood. So let's do the math and find out when God sent the flood. In chapter 5, verse 32, Genesis 5:32. Okay, and Noah was how old? 500 years old when he gives birth to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, so let's keep that number in mind. 500 years old. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 6. Chapter 7, verse 6. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth, and Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his wife's sons, so forth, so on. So he's 600 years old when the flood is, when he's given the flood. So that's 100 years. So 100 years from the birth of his children until the flood begins. Look at chapter 7, verse 11. Chapter 7, verse 11. He says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 7th day of the month, the same day were the fountains of the great deep broken up, the windows of heaven were open. Okay, so that's telling you that 100 years, 2 months, and 7 days after the birth of his children, the flood comes.
Say that number again.
1 year, 2 months, and 7 days. You can come on. We haven't started yet. We're just covering something else.
So it was 1 year, 2 months, and 7 days?
Correct.
So he was 100 when he had the son, and 600 when the flood came. That's
No. He was 500 when he had the children.
Uh-huh.
The flood happened when he was 600 years old.
So that's 100 years.
Correct. He gives you the month and the day in chapter 7, verse 11.
Mm-hmm.
The month and the day that he goes in is in the 600th year, the 2nd month, and the 7th day. Chapter 7, verse 11.
Okay, but if he was 500 years old when the triplets were born, are they 100 years old? Or they're just one hundred.
Correct. But I'm not worried about their age right now. I'm just showing you that from the time they're born until the flood, there's how long? Not 120 years.
No.
100 years, 2 months, and 7 days.
70 years.
Do I?
17 days.
17 days. 17th day.
Good call.
Mm-hmm. So, because of that, we know that it wasn't 120 years.
Right.
But we find another detail that we weren't even looking for. We find out how old his kids are, these 3 kids, when God makes this declaration. Look at verse chapter 6, verse 9. Chapter 6, verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, imperfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So how old are his children when he's talking here? 2 months. The oldest they can be is 2 months, 17 days. That's the oldest his children can be. So God intends from birth a parent to be instilling the Word of God in their child. From infancy. That gave Noah the declaration from God that he was just, that he was perfect. Let's see. Now, let's see if our math works out. Chapter 9, verse 28. Chapter 9, verse 28, he says, if I can find it. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. Okay, so what's the math we have? 500 years old, he has children. When he's 600 years old, the flood is on the earth. After the flood, he lives 350 years. Okay, the next verse. Verse 29. And he dies at 950 years. So the math adds exact to the T. So he preached for 100 years, not 120 years. The 120 years has nothing to do with man or how long that Noah was given to preach. It has to do with God limiting the lifespan of a giant.
So he worked on the boat for a year. It took him a year.
100 years.
100.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He had to wait till those boys could get old enough to do some work.
Right.
And he could take a break. I'm just going to take it easy till they get here. I'm work on plans and
Sit at the gate.
do some architecture. Right. Okay, so that's it, and then we'll get into a lesson now.